Welcome back, everyone. I got my new BenQ lamp arrived yesterday, using it on a fret job for the first time, and my first impression is very nice. I'll bring you in for a kind of closer look at this in a second. So we'll start by getting the old frets out. We will be doing a compound radius on this one. Well, there's the new BenQ light that I've attached to the workbench, and it's worked out beautifully because I've kind of put it midway, clamped it to the workbench. I probably didn't need to because that disc, it's got to weigh about 15 pounds. You can see I've put a small clamp on there just to hold it in place. So that's about halfway back, and it allows me to kind of swivel over to the headstock. Right now it's lined up with the fingerboard because we're just about to create a shallower radius for Ryan. For this, we're doing a compound radius. All my frets are lined up, cut to length, beveled and polished, ready to install. So we're going to create that radius. Before we do that, I just want to show you how I make up a radius gauge. So this is just a piece of oak. On this end we have a pivot screw that protrudes just ever so slightly beyond the surface of the underside. I have press fit that pencil into place. I just kind of lay this on the bench and got my tongue depressor there and just scribe. So there is our 12-inch radius, and you can see that's rocking big time. So this is obviously a much tighter radius than 12 inches. It's like 7.5 probably. And this is the longest sanding block that I send out in the fretting kits. I've been making up these fretting kits for the last 24 years for my students. And now my Patreon subscribers, and I guess anyone else who's interested, let me know and I'll send them out. So this is the longest one. I'm avoiding the edge. I don't want to touch the edge, and the sanding block is narrower than the fingerboard, and that's exactly what we want. Got that leather underneath there flexing to the radius, and we just want to decrease that top end to our 12-inch radius. So we'll end up with a compound radius, and we'll check that across the width and along the length with the straight edge as we progress here. Again, starting at the top end in the center, because it's really the center that we're bringing down. The outside edges you don't want to touch until we're right on the home stretch. Boy, I gotta admit, this BenQ light is coming in pretty handy. It's great that it's elongated like that and lights up the whole fingerboard. Block, we are going to decrease the grit to 120 and then eventually make our way down to 180. Now I have mentioned this as well in other videos. Be very careful not to roll off that edge. You don't want to soften that. This should actually be sharp to the touch when you're done, so that the underside of the crown sits flush against the wood. This is a nice, gradual, controlled way to create that radius. I have actually set a stop clock a couple of times in previous videos just to illustrate how quickly I do this. Of course, I'm taking much longer to do this right now because I'm taking the time to explain this and film this for you guys. The radius increases, as it should, as we get up to the top end. So we're going to bring it down, concentrating on the middle, and then we'll switch over to a lighter grit sandpaper. The height of the center of the fingerboard very gradually increases as we move towards the nut. You can see the swath of sanding marks or tooling marks in between the lacquer that still remains on that outside edge. So now we're going to move up to that 120 grit. So there's a couple of things I'm checking before I go to the final grit of sandpaper, which is 180. I just want to make sure that we've got enough depth for the tang, and it looks like, yeah, we got plenty there. So obviously the greatest amount of material was taken off right here to reduce that down to a 12-inch radius, and there is plenty of room for that tang. Okay, so that's one thing you got to check, because sometimes you'll need to deepen those slots after lowering the radius. Not the case this time through. So the next thing I'm checking with my 8-inch straight edge, this is one of the 6 straight edges that you get in your kit. I find that the 8-inch is great because it really divides the neck in thirds. So I'm just checking across the radius, along the length, to make sure that we have this dead straight along the trajectory of the string path. And we do. Lastly, I'll go end to end and make sure that we got that good and straight. And that is looking great. Happy with that. Okay, so let's move down to our final grit, 180 grit, and then we'll be ready to install the frets. Here's our final abrasive, our 180 grit. And in this case, we're really just getting the scratch marks of the previous 120 grit. From there, we'll be ready to put frets in. Again, I come right to the edge. I want to sort of create a good crisp edge for those frets to lie on. And we are just about there. That is our compound radius. And there's a reason that people charge a lot more money for this job, because it's a lot more work. I don't want to use the buffer or any power tools at this point. The last thing I want to do is burn through the lacquer down to the bare wood. So this is all finished. Back to polish. Yeah, that's good. That did it. This job in particular, boy, it's so nice to have that this new detail lamp from BenQ. Thank you again, Cassandra, for thinking of me. Okay, we are just about ready for the moment of truth to get some strings on this guitar and check it out. Well, the added spin-off that you guys get with this new light is you get to see the detail as well. When Cassandra first contacted me from BenQ about this lamp, I really wasn't too sure, but since I've been using it, I just have it centrally located. I can quickly pivot it over, working on the detail for the nut, the compensated nut, and I can also swing it over this way when I'm doing any type of bridge work or wiring. Now, what I've just discovered, because I'm just using this for the first time, it also has enough reach for my little knuckle vise for cutting those nut slots. Okay, so we'll just mark it first. This is just the 16 thou. Now I use a 36 thou as a low E, and the A string, D string. I switch over to 26 for the G, and then back to the 16 for the second string and the first string. Okay, these are 9 to 46, so I've got a 50 thou to open up that low E, and a 42 thou to open up the A, and a 36 thou for the D. Okay, back to the guitar. What I'm doing here is I'm approximating the elliptical curve on the leading edge of the compensated nut. So we will go back to the radius disc sander and trim this back. I've just started on this 6th string and lined up the 7th fret and its corresponding octave. Now I did need to cut this screw back, because if I left the full length of screw on, it would interrupt with the string being fed through the block in the back. When I cut the spring, I kept about 1/3 of its length and left it in there, and this has worked out perfectly. I'm bringing you in to show you this because the final placement of this 6th string saddle is going to determine the route that I take with the other 5. Now you can see that this spring is just about fully compressed, and I know it's got to come back further. I think the D and the G will be fine. I know just by the placement of that 6th string saddle that the A string has to come back quite a bit, and that spring will also need to be cut down. So I'm going to do that right away and even take this fastener down a little bit. So we'll see how we do with this. That's actually flat, which is a good thing. It's got to come forward a little bit. Let's try that. Okay, that did it. So just bring that back. Looking pretty good. G. Yeah, that's going to come back just a little bit too, so we don't need to alter that. So there's still lots of room in this compression spring. No need to cut anything or shorten it. We'll bring that back just a little bit more and try it again. Still got lots of room for compression on that spring. Okay, I can live with that. So I'm going to start into the B string and just see how far we got to go on this one. Surprisingly, it's good right where it is. Can't argue with that. Perfect. Okay, first string. So we're done. The curvature, the placement of the saddles, the 7th fret note and its corresponding 19th fret octave note are all in tune. Now we turn our attention to the compensated nut. Well, before I bring this in the house and plug it in, I wanted to share some design details on this guitar. It's pretty interesting. It's like all this hardware, like look at the size of these fasteners. They're like, it's kind of like a Strat on steroids. The plate, a little bit thicker than a Strat plate. These are definitely a heavier fastener than your standard Strat. Even the expansion springs, a little bit bigger diameter and a little bit heavier wire, like noticeably heavier than your standard Strat. The string claw, same thing, just a little thicker metal. All the way around, it's just like a little bit heavier built. The customer, Ryan, is a former student of mine actually, he's really got an eye for this stuff. Like, I've never heard of Greco. I'm very impressed. Have a look at these machine heads. So these are the company brand Greco machine heads. These are the nicest stock machine heads I've ever tried on any Strat, American or otherwise. They're Leo's split post design. Now they are quite tall, so you're really going to make sure you got enough wind, especially on the low E and A, to pull the strings down so that they're tight in the nut slot. Even the string trees are just a little bit thicker than your standard Strat. I mean, these guys were taking this job very seriously. Here's another example. They are stamped saddles, but again, the actual metal for the stamping is quite a bit heavier than what Leo used originally. The 6 fasteners at the leading edge of the bridge plate, I always lift those middle 4, I'm sure most people do, so that they're essentially idlers, the 2 outside ones that do the job of holding the bridge steadily in place. Even the bridge plate itself, a little bit thicker. The fit of the bridge to the pick guard, everything about it, the pick guard itself, it's impeccably done. This is definitely an example of an early Japanese manufacturer that took the job of making a Fender Strat very seriously. Now that all of the final calibrations are done, we'll put this last fresh set of 9 to 46 strings on, tune it up, and then check that calibration for the last time. Even a simple thing like feeding the strings through. I'm sure that a lot of you out there have had a cheaper offshore Strat where you go to feed the strings through and it ends up being a 5-minute job per string hole. Anyway, this obviously machining here as well is impeccable. They feed through effortlessly. You know, all of this stuff you take for granted. So about the only word of caution that I have for you, Ryan, is to make sure that you leave extra wind for these split string posts, because they're quite a bit taller than your regular split posts. So you got to get enough wind on there to guarantee that you pull the low E and A string tightly into the nut slot. Same deal here with the A string. I'm cutting it longer than I normally would, just to allow for that extra tall string post. I noticed the last set that I had on, I didn't quite leave enough, and that open A string especially wanted to buzz. You can see there's not a lot of break angle there, but there's a little bit, enough to pull that tight into the slot. I probably could have put another wind around that A string. With the rest of the strings, you got the string trees that take care of that, so it's really no issue at all. I think the A string is really the one to watch out for. I've had lots of instances in the past where you get a tuner that's like nice and smooth to turn, but it doesn't stay in tune. I'm sure you've all experienced that too. These predate the ratio tuners by decades. They're really something. Anyway, you'll see when we take it in the house. You'll also see as we go through our proverbial tuning check just how smoothly these tuners are. So Now, this company obviously had a lot of respect for Leo's original design. Okay, so here's our quick tuning test. Low E, 7th, 19th, open, and 1st fret. E string. D string. G. B. And the 1st string.